Welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K, and we are in studio today, always sponsored by the original Wine of the Month Club, with a club for everybody, actually. Ed, what do you think of that, Ed?
I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah, no question about that.
I hate to agree with you, but you're right.
That's right. Of course, Wine Talks is available on Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, and all your favorite podcast hangouts. And I brought back Ed Masciana because of such positive comments from our first 2 or 3 episodes, Ed.
Mostly from my family.
Yeah, that's right. Your family and my friends. No, actually, it's kind of interesting. We had at least 3 European winemakers slated for this week and next week to come in, and they've all canceled their trip.
Oh, what a surprise.
Which is interesting because they canceled Provine. Did you know that?
Yes, I did. I read that.
And, there's a whole bunch of other wine events throughout the world that are coming up. For instance, that famous Burgundy tour where you start up in Chablis and come down to the Beaune area and the Côte de Nuit. And I thought, wow, these are amazing, expensive events. And we were in Vegas over the weekend at the Wynn, empty, absolutely empty. Yeah. In fact, I felt bad. There was one company because they canceled 16 conventions.
Oh, my God.
I know. And
that's a big deal in Vegas.
It is. Now, think about the pre-planning of a show like that.
Years.
Right.
Years.
And then when I was playing golf, which I hadn't played forever, the trolley went by that connects the convention centers and is all decked out in somebody's corporate sponsorship. So you can imagine with the lead time you have to do to make sure you graphic the trolley, the monorail. And it's got this company, which there's nothing going on. That's saying, visit our booth at whatever.
Pretty scary stuff.
I felt really bad. Anyway, we brought Ed in because we've had a lot of conversations lately about negociants. And I think it's an interesting subject. Ed fancies himself as a negociant because he is. He's been doing it for many, many, many years. And Ed has some distinct opinions on that subject and others, of course. But Ed's been hanging around here for, since 1969 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good to have you back, Ed.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be back.
As far as you know.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah. We're really happy to have you. Really, seriously. We are.
It's a crazy business right now, and it's gotten crazier.
It's really
really gotten crazier.
I had a conversation with somebody this morning. There's been a lot of mergers and acquisition comments. I had more people calling about research studies. They pay me money for the hour to talk to me about the business. You and I had a conversation this morning with a huge importer. We'll talk about that today. But the industry, I'm telling people, it almost changes. If I don't look at this for sure in 6 months, and change directions to the direction of what people are drinking and where the industry is going to sell things and where people are hanging out to buy things, I'm going to make a mistake.
Well, I don't know about that, Paul. I think the one thing that has made you guys last as long as you have, and you're coming up on your 50th year, is you haven't really changed that much. You really haven't.
No, we haven't changed that part.
Okay, you're still offering some really good wines at really good values. And in many cases, they're wines nobody ever heard of, and they're willing to take a chance because you've been doing it long enough. And I'm sure there are going to be times when people go, "No, I don't like that wine." But come on, how often does that happen?
Well, let me take that the next step because this is an important feature. Now that I've been getting samples from my competitors, now figure that out, right? Now, you've been doing this longer than I have as far as buying and selling wines, and I've been doing it for 30 years plus my dad's experience, and I've never received samples from my competitors to taste and maybe feature as a club. So one of the strategies that many of these giant monolith clubs are doing because they're buying monolith wines in big giant bladders and bring them to America is, they actually, in their pitch to raise money, which is where the crux of the problem lies in this industry. They raise a bunch of money and spend it all. But in that pitch, they say, one of the markets we have is wholesale. So we're going to sell direct to the consumer via these clubs like the Wall Street Journal or Lot 18 or whatever.
Right.
And we're going to establish a wholesale side. Now you know how difficult it is to be one or the other.
Excuse me. What are they going to do with this wholesale side?
That's the question.
If they're already selling to the consumer, what's the wholesale side going to do?
Well, because I suppose that's how they move extra juice. Why did I get 36 samples from one of my competitors, not that long ago, to taste through, of which, by the way, they all were undrinkable in the sense of I would never feature them in the club. So then I started thinking, okay, what's the next step of that? You've got these giant bladders, and we talked to a guy this morning. What did he say? How many liters is that bladder of
Oh, what is that?
Flexi Pack? 20,000 liters?
20,000 liters, yeah.
Right? So that's
It's
what?
about 11,000, 11,000 cases.
Yeah, okay. So he brings in this Flexi Pack of this juice or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and he drives it to wherever you want. I'll dump it off in Illinois. I'll dump it off in New York. I'll dump it off in California. You guys bottle it the way you want, right? That's what he said today.
That's right.
Okay. And this is a huge part of the industry. And this is why the consumers are confused. Why Groupon has 15 bottles for $45, and why people feel like they're going to get a good value because of that. And it doesn't work that way. And I've determined that. All right, that's what's happened to the marketplace. Was that like this 20 years ago?
Well, no, it couldn't have been because there wasn't that much wine being produced, and so the market, and even though the market was a lot smaller, I mean, today you just have massive amounts of wine, massive amounts. That's all there is to it. It's ridiculous. I mean, when your dad started the Wine of the Month Club in '72, there was 260 wineries in California, and I thought it was 4,000.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
that's
come on,
just
do
California.
the math. I mean, so and plantings have gone up exponentially. So you got more grapes, you got more wineries, and I'll tell you one thing that I've been telling people that nobody's thought of. If there were 260 wineries in 1972, there were 260 winemakers. Okay, so most likely there were the best 260 winemakers in California. Today, there's 4,000 wineries. Are there 4,000 really good winemakers?
No.
No, there aren't. Okay.
Okay, that's an interesting point because when you read a great book, and I recommend to all the listeners, is George Tabor's book on the Judgment of Paris, because it's not just about Steven Spurrier's judgment and what happened to the marketplace after, but it talks about the grassroots growth of the winemaking techniques and styles of Napa Valley that not occurred happenstance. It came from qualified people like Mike Gergich, who through experience, because enology degrees were few and far between in those days.
That's right.
You went there to get understanding of what you were doing, but really the work and the experience and the experimenting was done in the vineyard and in the winery.
That's right. Exactly right.
And so the Winiarskis of the world and the Gergiches of the world, the Mondavis of the world,
And the Chellischefs and the Heitzes and those guys, yeah.
they were cutting their teeth in the vineyard trying to figure this out. And I get a lot of people the wineries here that the experience of the winemaker is not. In fact, I was just teasing you about this business card here from Richard Hartenberger of Midnight Cellars. He didn't go to Davis or Fresno State or anything like that to get an enology degree. He actually just did it in the cellar like the old school. But the point I was trying to make was, okay, so now you've got these wonderful estate wines, which you and I were just talking about. They sent you samples. And why? Why all of a sudden are we getting samples like these, Napa Valley, good quality wines, being sent through us through alternate channels to taste, to buy?
Well, because there's too many of them and they can't sell them.
Right.
That's the main reason.
I mean, the Napa Valley group, the conversation I had with Sarah Clearman at the Napa Valley Register, it wasn't an interview about Wine of the Month Club. She was actually asking me questions about how we can help the wineries jar them loose, jar this volume problem loose, because everybody's got this problem.
Well, they got to stop making as much wine. I mean, friends of mine like Brian Babcock have actually ripped out vineyards. You know how much it costs to plant a vineyard, and they just rip it out. Rick Longoria is making less wine. He's lessening his contract because they're not making the wine, and they're not selling the wine that they're making.
So Brian Torp's, I read about some vineyards being torn up.
His vineyards are now about half of what they were 20 years ago.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and
he makes great wines.
He makes great wines, but you got to sell it, and it's not like making windshield wipers. If it doesn't rain for a while, you get rid of the night crew. You can't do that when you're growing grapes. You can't go into the vineyard and say, "Oh, you guys over here, you stop producing because we're not selling the wine." Okay, that doesn't happen, because you start forcing a vine to not produce, you risk losing it, and now you're talking about a lot of money.
Do you think that this problem now is exasperated by the conversation we had this morning, which is, oh yeah, we'll bring in a 20,000 gallon, flexi tank and put it wherever you want, bottle it however you want?
Well, see, the problem is that worldwide wine consumption is declining.
That's true.
Okay. France is drinking less wine. Italy is drinking less wine. Spain is drinking less wine. All right. but they're making more.
They're making more.
So now they have to find a market for their wines, or, there's going to be even more rioting in the streets of Provence like there was 10 years ago, where it got really ugly. People were killed because they're rioting because they can't make any money.
Gilets jaunes? That's not the Gilets jaunes, huh? The yellow vest guys are out there. No, I'm kidding.
No.
It's a different program.
Different show.
So there's a couple of offshoots to that conversation. Too much wine in the marketplace. People are drinking less. It's not the millennial issue. It's not the baby boomers. We're still drinking wine. There's still enough consumption. You brought it up the last time we spoke that it's not going anywhere. Wine consumption it's a product that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. It will have its ups and downs. And just think about really the contemporary side of California wine. It's really pretty contemporary, right? I mean, California's been through some cycles, and it's only been around since the 70s of any quantity.
Right. I think that's a fair statement.
It'll go up and down as it is. So I was thinking, okay, we've got this stuff. How much more confusing is it for the consumer now that you've got all this wine being made, all these different sources for it, all these co-ops throughout the world are bottling it in 20,000 gallon bladders and sending it to America, that somebody is around, and I certainly would pat myself on the back, to taste all of it.
Right.
And I thought to myself, okay, so if I'm getting samples from these other things too, our service is, and this is not a commercial, I just brought it up to my mind, that our service is being more valuable to the consumer, because not only are we weeding through the regular stuff you see on the shelves, the stuff you see, all the regular wines that are eye level at Ralph's Market and Vaughn's Market, but we're also tasting the stuff that's coming through the other channels, like through Groupon and the internet and other sources like that. And how valuable of a service is that? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but bulk purchased wine is here to stay. It's always been here, and it's always going to be here.
Without question. There's no question about that. I mean, I'd like to see, the numbers that I'd like to see now is what is the percentage of wine that is going into the bulk market? Because the number was always 10%. When I started Peralta as a negotiant label 20 years ago, that was it. It was 10%. But I have a feeling, and I can't get these numbers from anybody because nobody wants to tell you because it'll make them look bad. I think it's closer to 15, maybe even 20% now.
Of what?
Of everything that's crushed, what goes into the bulk market?
Oh, no, you're off by 60 or 70%. Most of the wine goes in the bulk market.
No, that
very few wine percentages.
No, I'm talking about California. We make 300 million cases of wine.
You can get that number from the Wine Institute.
Yeah, well,
it's not as much as you think, because most of it is not estate bottled. So then I start thinking, okay, we always pitch the ethereal value of wine, which I still believe is the reason to drink wine, what it makes you feel, how you talk, not how you talk, but the things that you want to talk about, the way it releases anxiety at the end of the day, all the things that come with a good glass of wine, because it speaks to you not just from 14% alcohol or better, but it speaks to you of its terroir, its grape, and other things. So if you don't get the terroir, if it's bulk made, and you're not expressing terroir because it's Vin de Table or Vin de France or just California, you can still certainly have the experience of the grape. Like that's just
no
still
question about it,
right? It should still represent
absolutely.
The grape. So we buy wines that taste like Cabernet because they are Cabernet, not wines that taste like Pinot that are Cabernet.
Right? Exactly. I think that's a good analogy.
Right?
Yeah.
So the reason, it's almost like a real legitimate service, like a tasting service, which is what we are, is becoming more legitimate and more required to cut through all the junk that's going out there.
Well, yeah, that's a very, very good point. I think the spirit of adventure and excitement in tasting new wines can get dampened when you taste some really bad ones.
In fact, we were at dinner. We were at dinner in Vegas at Piero's great old school Italian place, and I brought nothing but Italians. I bought a Valpolicella. I brought two Super Tuscans. I brought a Montefalco, Sagrantino Montefalco, and people were like loving the wines. And of course, they're good because we bought them and we know how to taste them, but they were so paired with the foods. And one of my friends who listens to this podcast all the time, who I threw under the bus at a dinner we went to the other night because he brought a Pinot to an Italian restaurant. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that if you drink what you like and what's good, but from him, since he's a very experienced drinker and a very good taster, I thought, okay, we're going to talk about the idea that the food goes with the wines and vice versa. But moving on to this idea of a negociant, what's been happening on your side of the fence of trying to find, and a negociant being somebody that sources the wines for their brand. So you have Peralta, you've got a couple other brands that you've had over the years, and you go out and you look for quality representative juice of the grape or the region to put in your brand.
Exactly.
And what's your experience these days with those kinds of things?
Well, it's kind of odd, Paul, to be quite honest with you, because, 20 years ago, I would call for samples of Cabernet. I would get 50 samples of Cabernet. Okay, so I was, the wealth of choices was ridiculous. I could pick the best Cabernets that I could use, and one thing you have to understand about blending wines, you taste a Cabernet that is good, but it's lacking this. It's lacking acidity. Then you taste a Cabernet that's got too much acid, and you blend them together, and then you get the balance that you're looking for. These wines on their own are a little off base, but the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Right.
And for a while, I don't know if it is today, you may know this better than I do, everybody was all hooked on, the wines have to be blends. They have to, because Bordeaux, it's Cabernet Franc, it's Cabernet something. Every wine you buy is a blend, even if it's 100% Cabernet. Not all the Cabernet comes off of the same vine.
Right. That's a good point.
And 3 vines down or 3 rows down, that Cabernet is going to be a little bit different.
That's a very interesting point, actually.
So it's up to the winemaker who decides what you're going to blend with what you've got. And I'll tell you right now, if you have 100 acres of grapes and you can make, 60,000 cases out of those 100 acres, you're not going to make 60,000 cases.
Right.
Because not all of those wines are going to be as good from all of those Cabernet grapes in the same vineyard.
Right.
And that's why a good vineyardist will plot out a vineyard, know that these grapes produce this kind of wine and these grapes produce this kind of wine just based on the soil component and on the sun exposure, and then they ferment them separately, and then they decide how they're going to blend them.
That's true.
All right, and so every wine is a blend.
That's a very interesting. That's a great point.
Thank you. So the fact is, what do you do with the rest?
They're few and far between, but that's a good point.
You just aren't hanging around enough. So what do you do with the leftovers? You either sell them to somebody else in bulk, or you keep them and make a house blend that you sell in the tasting room for half the price, and everybody's happy. But to do that work, to make that kind of effort, which almost every single one of the selections that we have are made by people just like that, takes time and it takes money, and
That's
you're not
right.
going to be able to buy it for $4 a bottle.
No. It's funny you said that. I just realized something. The old term was négociant éleveur.
Right. Exactly.
You elevate
it.
And that's what your job is. And how many times have you and I have been in the tasting room here with my dad's old 100 ml graduated flask, and we're mixing this with that to see what it's like. But
do it all the time.
And its granularity, unless it's a complete field blend, a field blend meaning you go out in the vineyard and you pick it all and you throw it all in the vat and you blend it together and you see what happens.
Yeah.
Typically on a field blend, the concept isn't about one grape; it's about 2 or 3 grapes, and then you ferment them together, and that has its downfalls and its pitfalls. But you're right. Every winemaker that comes through here talks about their particular vintages of their particular grapes, is saying we barrel select. Not only do you ferment them different, but we already know that from the South 40 came these grapes.
That's right.
And they have a different character, and so we pick the best lots for this one level of brand, and we pick the second best or whatever they consider. And not only that, balancing amongst those barrels to come up with the whole that's greater than the sum of its parts, even though it's 100% Cabernet. I didn't even think that way. That's an interesting thought. So what's your experience been with the stuff you've been seeing lately?
Quite honestly, I've been disappointed. I really have been. I have tasted a lot of bulk samples lately that have no place to go or need some help, and the people that are selling it don't want to work with me. I said, look, I'm going to need to add this or that to it. I tasted, a Petit Syrah or a Syrah and a Zinfandel, both of which were quite good, but they needed, and I'm not talking about huge additions. I'm talking about 10% or 12% or something, Do
you think there's something noble about not doing anything and not blending, say, well, this is what the vineyard gave me, so I'm just going to put it in the bottle.
No, that's not it at all. I'll tell you what it is. It's blind stupidity is what it is, okay? Because there is no way that you could taste
A lot of
this.
that going around here.
There's no way you could taste this wine and say, I'm going to put it out in the market. I mean, for what you could do, for what it would take for you to just blend something else in there that would soften one part or harden one part or do something else to make it better, is worth doing instead of sending out the wine just the way it was made, because, like I said, there are 4,000 winemakers in California, and they can't all make good wine.
No,
some of them don't even know how to make good wine, okay?
Well, that's the other thing. They don't know how to make good wine, and there's 4,000. There's more than 4,000. There's going to be 7,000 or 8,000 because there's a whole bunch of people in the wings who are hoping to do it, or they're working in the cellar anyway. But so there is something about this. I think that's really important to point out, and that is there are a lot of, not only with the organic sustainable movement, which is fine. I think the wines can be very good, and there's some of them I don't even know organic or biodynamic when I taste them until they tell me. Though there's a freshness about them that seems to be good. But there's also this other movement of this sort of rustic. We took it from the vineyard and we made wine out of it, and you take it or leave it because that's what nature gave us. And I think I don't think that's wrong, but I think that the value of wine can be better experience and the ethereal and what it makes you do and feel is how the winemaker handles it, how their vision as an artist makes the wine.
As I've said many times, first of all, winemakers not artists; they're artisans, because they're working they're working with a certain set of ingredients that nobody else is working with. Okay, and they're only as good as their ingredients. To compare them to artists is like saying, hey, I'm the guy who sold those paints to Michelangelo, and he was able to paint the Sistine Chapel because I gave him the right paints.
I knew that guy.
No, sorry. Everybody had the same paints.
Yeah.
I gave Beethoven the notes to write for the Fifth Symphony. No. Everybody has the same notes, okay? It's what you do with them, okay? Winemakers have a different set of ingredients that they work with. I mean, some of them have the same ones if they get the stuff off the same vineyards, but by and large, they're only as good as what they do with those ingredients. Now, that's not artistry, that's artisanship. Okay, now that we got that cleared up.
Thanks for that.
I don't want to hear that again. Okay.
I go to Wikipedia to figure
But then after that, again, I got to bring up the fact that what they may like is maybe not what the public likes. Mm-hmm. Okay?
That's true.
I mean, I made wines when I was doing big volumes. We were doing 18, 20,000 cases a year that I wasn't crazy about, but they sold like hell.
Well, that's funny you said that, because there have been wines here where you and I have tasted together, and you love it. No, you don't like it.
Yeah.
Right? Because, well, let's face it. We taste so much, and we get you get numb to the basic stuff
to a degree.
And you want to experience interesting stuff. And the conversations I have with people along the way in the wine world, as in the other night in Vegas, where I'm saying you need to taste this Sagrantino. You need to taste this wine because it's part of the wine business in Italy, and it's totally different than the stuff you're tasting from here. And like it or not, I want you to taste it because it's interesting. So we're sort of numb to the basic, good drinking Cabernets.
Right, sure.
But then they sell really well because the complicated value of them isn't seen by the regular consumer; it's seen by us.
You have to buy wines that you can sell.
That's it.
Now, it doesn't mean they're wines you're going to drink. They're wines you're going to sell.
Right.
I mean, I remember, salespeople when they would come in when I was a wine buyer and say, I don't really like this wine. Okay, sorry. And I go, but I'll buy it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what do you mean? Well, because I don't have to like it, but I know what my customers like, and I'm going to give it to them.
That's it. I'm glad you brought that up. You have studied wine with my dad early on in the early 70s, Leslie Devant, all the things you need to do to learn about wine, and you're one of the most knowledgeable wine guys around here. You've taught classes at the universities. You've sold retail, right?
I've done everything in the wine business that you can do except make money at it.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people in that boat.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So you've sold retail, you've bought and sold juice, you've bottled juice, you've brokered wines. I guess you haven't done it. There's nothing you've missed.
Pretty much. I've cooked in restaurants. I bought wine in restaurants. I did in restaurants, training staff, whatever.
Yeah, right. Well, so have you bought anything lately to negotiant éleveur.
No, I have not, and it's not because there's not a lot out there, which there is. I mean, I've never seen so much wine on the market right now, and the prices are plummeting left and right, but the quality is not very good. I haven't even. I taste something and I go, okay, I'm not crazy about it, but I can work with it. I can put this there and do this and do that and do the other thing. And then the other problem is, I have had some really good wines from Washington State, which is probably the most underrated wine area in the world. But then the problem becomes, bottling it and shipping it. And if you take the wine in bulk and you take it to California and it crosses another state, you lose the appellation and you lose the vintage dating. Okay. So those laws, which are stupid,
Well, we had that conversation this morning when we were talking to the importer of these bulk wines, and he said, "Well, if you want to bring in, a flexi tank of Barolo, it's no longer Barolo anymore."
That's right.
And Barolo being a district of France in the north, of Italy in the north, I didn't know that part. It's got to be bottled at the
source.
Yes.
So I mean, you only bring in those big tanks to be bottled here when it's going to be a very inexpensive wine at Big Lots or someplace like that.
Yes.
I mean,
we see a lot of that.
And most of them are terrible.
So the idea then, I want to do some math with this. A case of wine is 2.4 gallons.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
2.3.
2.3 gallons.
Yeah.
And you can get around 25 cases a ton. So if you're picking, let's go back all the way back. Your vineyard gets like a low yield vineyard. Let's just go through the numbers for the listener. A low yield vineyard might be 1 ton an acre?
Oh, 1 ton an acre. That's really low.
Okay, 2 tons an acre.
2 tons an acre.
Okay, so that's be on the low side.
Yeah, that's on the low side.
Then the high side is like 10 tons an acre.
Well, that's high, yeah. Okay.
But I mean, if you're talking about Charles Shaw, in order to get it for $2.49 a bottle, you gotta be able to pull those kinds of numbers, right?
That's right.
In general, like any other agricultural product that you're farming, the more yield, the more apricots on that apricot tree, probably the less flavor they have.
Without question.
Yeah, that's the undisturbed
that's
nature.
How it works.
Right, that's how it works. Okay,
yeah.
So, but you don't always have control over the yield of your vineyard. You might get 2 tons on a regular basis, but some year you might get 5.
That's true. Now there are 2 things that come into play here. The first thing is the density of the vineyard. Okay, and vine density is now one of the hot topics in wine, because if you have 1,000 plants per acre and you're getting 4 tons out of it, then each plant has to produce
produce so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But if you've got 3,000 plants, then each one of those plants produce a third less. Well, when you get a plant to produce a third less, that quality is going up, but your costs are going up too, because now you can't do mechanized harvesting. You can't have mechanized, control over the vineyard. It's got to all be done by hand. You can't get a machine in there. You don't have the room,
Yeah.
So all that costs more money. Now, as a result, you can increase your yield without decreasing your quality. So that's going to help. But if the market's down, where are you going to sell it?
That's the thing. You got to sell it.
So you're between a rock and 3 hard places here.
So you're saying that the cost is going down. That's why I was going through the numbers. So let's say I'm getting 2 tons an acre, and I'm usually selling it for $20 a gallon. That seems a little high. What would be a Cabernet? $75 a gallon or something like that?
Well, it depends on where it comes from.
Well, let's just take Napa for fun.
Okay, well, Napa's going to be, it was $125
a gallon
about a year and a half ago.
So let's just take with that for fun. Let's say $100. It's easy math. $100 a gallon, so it's $230
for the juice.
For the juice, divided by 12, roughly $18 a bottle.
That's right.
Just for the juice.
That's right.
Right. Okay. And so now you add the juice, the bottle, the label, the cap, and then you add transportation, the box, profit. You gotta make some profit in there.
Well, let's start with the biggest cost, and then we'll worry about the profit.
So automatically you're into a position where it's really hard to make money now on an appellated wine. But I wanted you to unwind a little bit about what's happened and what you've seen cost wise. So we were talking not that long ago, and you were saying you're seeing juice now, and it just went down I think somebody told me that they were seeing cab, like Paso cab, for like $5 a gallon.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. There is some of that out there.
Yeah, $5 a gallon. So they're in the $10 and what, 15 cents, or $11 a case.
Yeah, something $11 a case.
Yeah, $11 a case. So now it's only $1 a bottle.
That's right.
For the juice.
That's right.
And you get $1 for glass, cork, cap, box. Now the wine should be coming down in price.
Right.
But so is the quality at that point.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. Okay.
So what have you seen then for these prices?
Well, I've seen some really mediocre wines that are due to bad winemaking. All right. But the one thing
we forgot that factor.
Yeah, we've got to factor that in. Now, there are times when I've gotten some really good samples that are obviously good winemaking, and considering the fact where it comes from and who made it, they're not making any money. All right. However, you got to consider the fact that this is the overage. All right. So if they have a contract to where they have to buy enough grapes to make 5,000 cases of wine, and the contracts usually go 5-10 years. And every year you're selling 4,000 cases of wine. You're not going to bottle that other 1,000 cases. No. You're going to sell it out in bulk,
right.
Try to get just the money you paid for it, and move on, because next year you got to take another 5,000 cases.
Right, because it's a contract.
Because it's a contract,
right.
And grape contracts are really hard to break, and they get really upset when you try to do that. So a lot of these wines that are on the bulk market are great values for that reason. The problem is finding them. A lot of them are there because either somebody went out of business, which doesn't happen that often, but you'd be surprised.
Yeah, well,
or they lost a market for it, or they lost a contract, and a lot of the problems now are with vineyards that have contracts. The contracts are up and they're not renewed. Well, now what do you do with the grapes? Okay,
right, yeah,
you got to do something with those grapes.
Something great. You're not going to turn them into raisins.
So they put them. They contract with somebody to crush them and put them in a facility and put them in tanks and try to sell them out in bulk. The problem is nobody has a vested interest in this wine.
Right.
They don't have a vested interest in making it correctly, or they don't have a vested interest in blending stuff into it so it's better. They just want to get rid of it because every time they think about it, they stay awake at night.
So those are two things I want to talk about. I mean, interesting things you brought up. One is anecdotally, well, I just made a deal on some rosé, some 18 rosé, which is gorgeous stuff, and I'm going to sell it in the classic series for, what is it, $12.95 a bottle.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, and I know that the vendor paid more than that just to bring it here. Okay, so we're going to sell it at a membership cost that's less than what she paid to bring it to America. So, and that's classic, particularly with rosés. But the other day, somebody came in with a 17 rosé, and the thing that's interesting about rosé for me, and off subject a little bit, is that because the new vintage comes in, the 19s are starting to come in now, particularly the ones from South America, and all of a sudden now the 18s and the 17s, the 17, rosé can age. It can actually do well with a little bit of bottle age. Not all of them, but some of them. Some do really well. And so the one that we're featuring in the club is really, really quite good. It's Loire. It's Pinot Noir. It's amazing.
Those wines are out of this world.
It's amazing.
They're out of this world.
But as soon as the 19s hit, everybody's got to move them. So a guy comes in the other day with a 17. He's like, hey, I'll say it to the listeners. He wanted $3 a bottle for it. And I go, look, dude, I said, what you want to do with this is take it to the 99-cent store, have them discreetly get rid of it because it's had it. It's done. He goes, why? Will you buy it for 99 cents?
Oh, my God.
I go, no, I won't buy it for 99 cents.
Did you taste it?
Yeah, I taste everything. That's the rule.
Was it over the hill?
Oh, yeah, it's done. I told him, I said, this stuff's done. He goes, but he was just trying to stay in the sale.
Well, I got a story for you that's probably one of my favorite wine stories of all time. I was working with your dad. I mean, this is 40 years ago, and this guy comes in and he says, we have this rosé that we lost in the warehouse. Okay, it's 8 years past the vintage. And your dad goes, what are you talking about? He says, you got to taste it. You won't believe it. So your dad calls me. He says, come here, taste this wine. It's 8-year-old rosé. Oh, yeah, right. So he pours the wine. We both taste it. We look at each other and go, this is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. It was one of the best wines we'd ever tasted. It was just phenomenal. I bought a bunch of it.
And that's a fluke, though, right?
That's a total fluke, okay? But I bought a bunch of it. That wine aged for 10 years, and it tasted like Corton Charlemagne, which is a very expensive white
Yes,
Burgundy.
right.
And I mean, to this day, I bring that up to your dad every now and then. He just shakes his head. He goes, "I've never seen anything like that since."
Though George Skorka from
great guy,
KJS
one of my favorite people.
He brought in a 97 Chard the other day, and I looked at him like, "Come on!" He goes, "No, you got to taste it."
97?
Yes, 1997. It was phenomenal. A phenomenal wine. I was shocked. But the other point that you made that took me off track here is an interesting thing: the vested interest comment in the wine. So once the control of the juice leaves the winery, the vested interest goes with it, right? So
pretty much.
So
they're still on the hook for selling it, though. They still own it, and they're still paying rent to somebody to store it for them.
Yeah, the vested interest, though, in what happens to it, the ethereal value, the branding of it. This is my wine, no longer exists. So somebody like you, a negociant, gets a hold of it, and I can't tell you how many times people ask, and we've actually taken advantage of this for many years, where one of the big brands, the ones that you like, I only drink, this kind of wine. I only drink, in the days of Mondavi, when it was Mondavi, I only drink Opus. But those guys make too much wine too.
No kidding.
They all make too much wine because of the formula we just came up with, which is, yes, you can control the yield of your vineyard to a certain extent with canopies and and watering and all the rest of it, but really, you have a bumper crop. You're not going to make the wine.
That's right.
If you can only sell 20,000 cases a year, you're only going to bottle 20,000 cases a year. No sense of sitting on the juice. You get rid of the money, get the cash flow going now.
That's exactly right.
And so, but the vested interest goes to whoever buys the wine and says, "Okay, I'm going to blend this." And I had somebody approach me recently. They're like whispering, like somebody in my office is going to hear them. They go, "I know." They go, "I know that Screaming Eagle makes too much wine, and you probably can get a hold of it, Paul, and we can make a wine out of it." I go, "First of all, I can't. Second of all, yeah, you're probably right. They probably do have excess wine, but they're not going to sell it to me, and you're not going to be able to say, if they did,
that it's Screaming
Eagle, right? You will be on a non-disclosure agreement that this wine did not come."
Well, that happens a lot. I mean, there are a lot of big wineries that actually take out another name under which to sell their bulk wine. So you don't know
you don't know
it's
where
them.
It came from.
Well, you know where it came from. You know you don't know who the winery was that made it.
So their DBA or their LLC, whatever they're bottling under, is just selling it in the bulk market. You don't know that it's Screaming Eagle or anybody else.
It could be Camus, it could be Phelps, it could be Mondavi, it could be a lot of other places too. I mean, I've called friends of mine that own, very, very good, very famous wineries, and I said, "You have any bulk wine?" "Yeah, but if I told you, I'd have to shoot you."
So, I've been reading George Tabor's book, and we're going to start a series on the Judgment of Paris, a separate series of podcasts. And like I told you earlier, I have Violet Gergich coming on. Mike Gergich being the winemaker for the Chateau Montelena Chardonnay. Warren Winiarski will probably be on the show, having made the cab. I have Stephen Spurrier coming up on the show, who's the guy that hosted this thing, which is interesting. It's a fascinating book if you haven't read it yet. George Tabor, the author of the book, is going to be on the show. So what he does in the book, which was so helpful to me, because he talks about each individual bottle, all the Burgundies and why they were chosen, all the Bordeaux, why they were chosen, the history of those chateaux and those wineries. And there's a fascination for me right now with Burgundy and these little, some of these parcels are like 2 acres. Right?
2 acres? What are you talking about?
That's huge, right?
They're 2 rows.
Yeah, right. And it was part of French law, and I'm going off subject here, but I just find this so interesting because wine really, the contempt, what you and I see as wine, and you've been doing it for 50 years, I've been doing it for 30, and what we know about wine, and we think it's, you think it's contemporary at the time you're doing it, and it's the history of wine is so fascinating, going back thousands and thousands of years. But even Burgundy is not that old. It's old to the extent that the monks were planting it in the 1200s and they're making wines.
It's pretty old, man.
But I know, but the history of what we know it to be, what we think Gevrey-Chambertin is so important to the world of wine, and Beaujolais and all the rest of the districts in that part of the world, pretty contemporary. They had their problems. Bordeaux had its problems in the 70s. They were not necessarily selling a ton of wine. They went through some periods of
that's true.
That's poor marketing, of poor recognition throughout the world, poor winemaking at some point. They've been through this. It's a rather, the stuff we're talking about is rather new in the sense of business in general. And I find that absolutely fascinating to peel back. But this series, I don't know why I brought that up.
I'm wondering. Well, don't forget, technology has really, really helped the wine industry tremendously. I mean, there's a lot of times when they have a poor vintage, and I remember talking to Peter Sichel about this back in the '80s, about the '84 vintage, which was a terrible vintage. And I remember going to the Union de Grand Cru de Bordeaux tasting and going, these wines aren't that bad for what I heard about the vintage. And Peter said, now we have the money to do the things and make the selections that can make better wine. Whereas in '63 or '65, two horrible vintages, they didn't know what to do. They made the wine, they were terrible, nobody bought them, and that was the end of that. But
so that's an interesting point, though. The technology. I mean, okay. Let's take the honest, pure winemaking. We planted the vineyards. We did all the work in the vineyard we need to do to make sure we get quality grapes. So you can't make good wine from bad grapes. Yeah, we know there's 100 chemicals you can put into a wine that are typically, most of them are natural chemicals, but there's still chemicals just the same to make something that's not, add acid or add sugar or whatever you want to do. But the technology. Like when you read this book, George Taylor's book, he talks about when he actually making these experiments, doing experiments with wood, doing experiments with toast, doing experiments with how long, doing experiments when they're gonna start the fermentation, how long the fermentation is gonna last. Those aren't technological changes; those are
That's right. Yeah, no,
basic
I see what you're saying.
winemaking techniques. Yeah. If you have a sorting table that's optical and it's throwing grapes off to the side that have a particular skin thickness that's wrong, that's technology,
right?
So you're refining it, but you're not. The technological changes are not happening inside the barrel,
right? With
yeast and sugar,
right?
That's not technological changes.
No, but you're missing one very critical point in all of this. It's called taste.
Oh, well, sorry about that.
Okay, now.
Gee, no, wait a minute. Why do you bring that complicated subject?
My taste is different from your taste, is different from his taste, and his taste, and his taste. So I've been to some of these barrel seminars, and let me tell you, they are fascinating. You take the same wine that's aged in French, American, and German oak for 6 and 12 months, and the differences are unbelievable.
Right.
Okay.
So that's not technology.
That's not technology. But what do you do with it? What do you do? Which one do you finally say, this is my...
Are you asking me this question?
Yeah, I'm asking. Well, I'm asking anybody this question.
Rhetorical
well,
question.
It is a rhetorical question, but the fact is, now you have to think about, well, how am I going to take this information and use it, and what's my end result going to be?
That's true.
Yeah.
Does anybody care? The German, if I'm buying it off the shelf, I don't know the difference between the German version and the French version, so I just buy it for what it tastes like.
Right. Exactly. But boy, I'll tell you, that was one of the most eye-opening tastings I've ever been to, because when you taste them right next to each other, you're going, oh my God, it's the same wine, but it's so different.
Well, I had that experience with a screw cap versus a cork, and so years ago we had that Chardonnay that came through, and they had bottled it on 2 different lines, from the same tank, and one was screw cap and one was cork, and they were different. And I'm not going to say one was better than the other, but even to the level of how it's packaged, changes may potentially what it tastes like.
Yeah, but Paul, come on, you take 12 bottles out of one case, you open them all up, and 2 of them are going to be different.
Well, that's true.
I mean, see, that's a thing that people don't understand.
That's true,
and that's what's so mind-boggling. But it's also exciting too.
Well, one of the things that Peter Mondavi talked about in our interview when I was up there was, they released a 1945, I don't know, about 10 years ago or something. I forgot when he told me. And it got this great score, like 95. Just, the esoteric score. And we'll talk about scoring in a second and we'll wrap this up. But this he just goes, we just got this amazing score. Now, think about 1945, right? Post-war.
Wait a minute. When did they taste it and get the score?
It was like 10 years ago.
Oh,
So there's no technology to talk about 1945, particularly in Napa.
No.
So it's just pure winemaking, pure grapes from the vineyard, pure winemaking, and then after they uncork it 50 or 60 years later, you end up with this amazing wine still. So that showed me something very interesting in my mind about the difference between technology changes in the wine business may not be all that ethereal because that important because the person tasting that wine and giving it that current score has been tasting all these current wines as well along the way.
Right.
They know what those current values taste like, right? So let's talk about scoring for a second because I think the public has been seeing, and I just changed, I don't know if you noticed on the newsletter, the idea of our score. Now, you and I have been talking about, and the 100-point score that's not that old. I mean,
Well,
really,
it's not even a 100-point scale because anything under 80 is not worth
it's not even a
drinking.
scale, right? I
It's a
understand,
20-point scale.
but the idea that there is a scale like that, I think Parker started it, right? So it's not that old, and it's not that important really because now, and this is why I'm getting to this point is, there's scores. I mean, they're like. I'm going to go back to the business side. These guys that are bringing these Tetra Techs or these flexi tanks of wine and sending them all over, they're sending them to these random tastings, to these little tastings, to sommeliers, master somms and masters of wines, and getting scores. And so, everybody's got a score now. And I know this for a fact because I'm in the business every day. Some of my competitors do this. They go, well, I got a 90 on this wine. Got it from the Suquamish wine tasting in New Mexico. I mean, and it got a 95. Well, it got a 95. You can't argue with that.
Well, I got a score to settle with that.
So what I changed, if you look on our newsletter, I changed it to the value scale. And it says value, Wine of the Month Club value scale, because we had a lot of customers saying, well, you gave it a 98 or a 97 or 96, and, Aubryon got a 95. I'm like, well, but we're not tasting Aubryon against these wines. And so I decided that the way we taste, and we're comparing the one next to it, the one after that, and the next one that come after that. And if I get all these $20 cabs, that score, that 98 or that 97 we gave it, is because the other $20 cabs
weren't as good.
That's
right.
And not that you're going to compare my 98 to the Spectator's 98, for Dun Howell Mountain Cabernet, right? It's not the same thing. And I think it's more valuable to the consumer than James Suckling's 95. I mean, that guy, he's like a rating machine. He's rating.
Yeah, but you know why he does that, Paul? I mean, it now done completely in reverse. Back in the old days, they were proud of their scores and they published them all over the place. Now, the scores, the raters, the guys with the newsletters, they want people to use their scores because that's how they get new people to subscribe to their newsletter.
Right, exactly.
It's the horse is now following the train.
And in George's book, which was written in 2007, Parker had well entrenched now, and now he's got all this competition going on, and everybody's got scores going on, and everybody's like touting the score and the shelf talkers, and the consumer's now going, wait a minute, I don't really like this, and it got a 92 somewhere or a 95. This isn't so great.
There you go.
And so that leads me to the last piece of the conversation, and I know your opinion on this, and I'm not sure I agree with it totally, but the Master Somm, I think, is a very academic, prolific, and very hard to get. Okay, I get it. And I'm not sure if you have a problem with the idea of a Master Somm versus just the regular Somm, because my definition of a Somm is somebody that serves wine at a restaurant. That's basically it. That understands the list. Right. All these certifications that you can log on to, I think are overdone, and people don't understand the value of them, because I can't tell you how many Witset 3s and Witset Ws and 2s and level 2 Somms that I talk to that don't know anything. Because they just, not that I'm not insulting them, they're not that interested. They just get the degree because they sell wine for this big company, and in order to sell wine for this big company, you have to have a degree. You have to do something, pass some test. The Witset 1, the Witset 2,
right.
All that stuff, right? Wines.
Well, the thing that annoys me the most about this is the biggest accolade they can get is when they taste wines blind and they pick them out. They pick out they'll pick out the varietal, they'll pick out the area. Sometimes they'll even pick out the producer and the vintage. Okay, and that's these sommelier contest. When they're
right.
That's the big deal. That's the big test is the blind tasting. I have one question. So what? I mean, really, in the world of wine, in the world of anything, how important is it for somebody to guess right, picking out 3 wines out of 7, the varietal and maybe the area. I don't care. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I guess
It
I
really
guess to the
doesn't
consumer,
mean
it doesn't mean that much.
It doesn't really mean anything. And you know something? Anybody with a smartphone now can be a sommelier.
Yeah.
How many grape varieties are on Chateauneuf-du-Pape? What are all the DOs and Priot?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Who cares? And they're not there to extend their knowledge. They're there to sell wine.
Right. That's what it comes down to, right? Well, it comes down to what you said earlier. It's very easy not to make money in this business. And there are a lot of people that sell it. I mean, I have great respect. I mean, I'll be honest, in the sense of these guys that spent a lot of time studying and it goes back to I think the value of wine to even the consumer. I think it's perfectly fine. And I don't agree with people that say, I'm going to take the snobbish side. I'm going to take the unintimidated wine. I don't think wine should be unintimidated at all. I think wine is intimidating. It's a subject of like any other subject you want to study. You want to study trigonometry, that's intimidating to start studying trigonometry until you get it. Now, wine is, if you want to enjoy a good bottle of wine and that's all you want out of it, that's great. And it still takes good wine to do that and an appreciation for good wine. But if you want to know everything about that grape and everything about that vineyard and about that maker and the history of the family, that's great too. You're never going to run out of subjects. So the value of these degrees is, what are you going to use it for? How are you going to promote the ethereal experience of wine because you have that any better than the other guy or other girl that doesn't? Not just because I'm a salesman for Young's Market and I have to have a level 2 SOM degree in order to do it. I don't think that's of any value.
That doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't mean
first of all, you got to be a good salesperson or you're not going to sell wine.
Right.
But I subscribe to the old adage, I'd rather drink a good wine with a bunch of friends than a great wine by myself.
Well, first of all, I've known you for 50 years, and that old adage I've never heard of. So,
hey, I'm full of old adages, But the point, the camaraderie in the wine business, and that's what draws the flies to the flame. I would say that most of the friends that I have, really close friends, I met through wine. And they're all over the country. Some of them are all over the world. Okay, and we still stay in touch. We still, send us anecdotes about wine, but it's the camaraderie that really draws everybody together. And,
it's an interesting point because the value, the all the people that sit in this chair except you, have this. I'm kidding. They have this passion. There's a passion level. There's like at some point the light goes on, and a lot of people will call it that moment that the lights went on, and I went, oh my gosh, this Chardonnay, this is what wine's really about, or this Cabernet, this is what wine's about. I'm done. I'm hooked, right? And I get that. It's always the same, not the same way they express this, but it's the same idea. There's a certain amount of passion for the people that sit in that chair and want to talk about wine.
Correct.
Now, my friends who love wine that have no interest necessarily in learning about it, but they still have the passion because they know what feels right when they taste it, and they know what feels bad when they taste it, and that passion in itself to say, I really like this, and I'm willing to buy more of it because of this character I'm getting, what it makes me feel like. And so the other night in Vegas, we had a little pre-party before this 60th birthday party, and I took up a Côte de Pie, the Chateau de Jacques. It was a 2013, and I took up a Montepulciano, an organic one from Ms. Tiberio, and so the Côte de Pie had turned. It was just too old, and I was shocked because
was it Bordeaux?
No, it was a Côte de Pie with a Morgon. It was a Beaujolais.
That's interesting because that was a good vintage over there.
I've had the bottle not that long ago, a few months ago, and it was great. It was so great. So I don't know, maybe the provenance of that bottle was bad. But of two people, if you just compare the response of the consumer, let's just say I was doing a market study, one person said, I don't like this. My wife said, I don't like this. And that's all she needs to know.
That's right.
For her. My other friend says to her, she's, why do you like it? She says, it smells like prunes. And he goes, I want to smell this. I go, why? He goes, I want to know what that means. I don't understand what that means right now. So I poured it in a glass for him. He goes, I don't get it.
Look, that's what makes the world go around. Everybody's got different tastes, and
but the idea, the two people, same bottle of wine, one saying, I just don't like it, and I'm not going to drink it. I'll find something else to drink, and the other one saying, I want to figure out what the problem is.
Well, that's why I stopped judging at all those fairs. I mean, I used to judge at L.A. and San Diego and Riverside and Orange County, and it was the quality of the judges that upset me. Really, I'm serious. I mean, because I would vote to give a wine a gold medal, and I didn't like it. And if they didn't like it, they weren't going to. I said, wait a minute, we're not here to force our personal taste
That's
on
a good
people.
point.
We are here to judge a wine based on its merits. You know, all we know about it is that it's a Cabernet Sauvignon from Amador County. Now, if it is a really good Cabernet Sauvignon from Amador County, then you deal with it accordingly, whether you like it or not. That's not the point. Did the winemaker hit the nail on the head with what this wine is supposed to be?
That's a great point.
You know, and I judged the wine. I did the Long Beach tasting, and I told them, I said, we're judging the wines based on what the winemaker sends us in a paragraph as to what they were trying to achieve, and if the judges agree, then they get a gold medal. Whether you like it or not. We don't care whether the judges like it, because it's a matter of getting a certain level of quality. And there's a lot of really high-level quality wines that I don't like. I don't want to drink them.
Right.
You know.
No, that's right.
So, I mean, but I'm not going to say, no, that's a bad wine. It's not a bad wine.
No.
I just don't personally enjoy it.
And the expression of where it's from, what it was, and what the winemaker was doing.
All of it.
And
Yeah.
that's what matters.
Yeah. Well, it does to a point, but then there's a point where you don't know where it came from or who made it, and it's delicious.
Yeah. We'll leave it at that, Ed. I appreciate you coming in today. I know
Always
that you
a
weren't
pleasure,
expecting to sit here for an hour and chat, but the coronavirus has taken its toll on the wine business, and hopefully I get to reschedule these 3 winemakers that are coming in, and you and I have a couple things to do together. We go see Dave Stair up in Sonoma. And
I might just do that.
Dry Creek.
Yeah, because he's an old buddy too.
Yeah, no, that'd be a fun conversation, and many more to come. So I appreciate it. Cheers, everybody. See you next time.